All right, awesome. People are joining, so we will get started. Caleb Brock, Director of Digital Strategy for Congressman Khanna. So excited to have you with us. One of the leading digital voices in the Democratic Party right now, if I do say so myself.
Oh,
And
appreciate it.
so happy to have you with us. Tell folks a little bit about your background, how you got into all this, and then we will dive right in.
Yeah, so I've been with Row now for almost a year, and it's been a year of beauty for sure. Before that, it was Pacific Northwest Consulting, email consulting, fundraising, things like that. And before that, it was various projects. And then before all that, it was Markey versus Ed Markey and running Ed Markey's DMs and just a bunch of twists and turns along the way to see how I ended up where I ended up and excited to see what happens next.
Yeah. And so, okay. So I think like one of the most interesting things for digital people, especially with a candidate like Rokana, who's sort of out there all the time, very online, is how do you sort of capture his energy and his voice in content when sort of you're probably the one making quite a bit of it and directing quite a bit of it.
Well, I would have to push back there. I think the
Okay,
reason it's so interesting to work with Ro is that he does the posting himself.
great.
And so we're constantly learning, right, about what it is that how he wants to convey different messages of varying complexity on different platforms and able to run with that as a team. And we really serve as a team to help amplify and get that out there. And that's why our team works so well with the press and comms and digital, because we're all really there and really just understanding how we can get his message out there in a way that like matters to people.
Okay, so like tell folks, and thanks for joining. Oh, we got somebody from Sydney with us. Tell folks how it works, like in real time, breaking news. You want to get something out. So is that just like he shoots a text like, yo, I want to say this, like let's get a video up, get a tweet up, or like talk people through that?
Yeah, I mean, it could be any person on the team coming up with an idea, coming up with whatever has happened, some way to respond to it, or even suggesting things to respond to. And the great thing about our team is that we're all able to jump in at a moment's notice. And I've only been there a year, of course. There's still a lot to learn, but we're able to bounce off each other's ideas, weaknesses, strengths, and I think create a cohesive message in a front that we can then get out there on all these different things. And I think that's the great thing about this team is that we're all so collaborative and you're able to say when there's a bad idea or when there's a good idea. And you know me, I've had bad ideas for sure. Okay. But you got to be told when they're bad ideas. You got to be told when they're bad ideas. But we're allowed to have those moments and nobody takes it personal. You just get the work done and you keep moving and you execute. And yeah,
And are there like guiding principles that generally sort of are behind the content? I feel like, we've seen some candidates, and I feel like Rokana doesn't do this as much. I'm sure other people disagree, but where it feels like they're like desperately trying to jump on a viral trend of the day, of the week, or like make content that feels a bit contrived, like the gym. Like, I'm very happy we haven't seen Ro at the gym, doing lifting yet. I mean,
don't give me any ideas.
I was gonna say more to come, I guess, but what is like the guiding principle and how much is the incentive to go viral part of that and be part of the conversation part of that, which of course I think is valid to a degree versus, stay substantive and speak out on the things he cares about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one goal and the number one mission of every single thing that we do day to day is are we able to be authentic and allow Roe to be his best authentic self to the American people, to the international community, to anybody who is wondering if there's a Democratic Party that's there for them, that's willing to take them in, that's willing to fight for the issues that matter to them. How can we authentically convey that message to people while also putting in best strategies, best practices for digital as well?
And like, I feel like one of the takeaways from 2024 obviously has been that Dems were behind online. They needed to invest in digital infrastructure. Do you think the party is like on the right track now in that regard? B, think there's an overinvestment and focus on digital, and I think like I put a little asterisk like how much of digital work and what you're doing is different than when folks talk about influencer work, because I think obviously there is a huge difference there from folks that have done digital on campaigns, but maybe people don't necessarily understand that.
I would say that the party is it's finally starting to learn and think about and look internally about where we went wrong, where we can reallocate, and where we can push the boundaries. And so I would say that a team example of doing that is the DNC team. the DNC social media, the DNC digital influencer team. I think that they're doing such incredible work now under the leadership of, Shelby Cole, Paulina, Chrissy, Matthew, Arlie, McKinley, right? Those people are doing such good work in terms of how they're engaging with communities online, how they're taking moments and building on them in ways that are actually extremely relevant, authentic, and true to the Democratic Party's brand, while also still getting views, attention, likes, engagement, and controversy when necessary.
Yeah, and speaking of controversy, obviously we've seen like Gavin Newsom's team really sort of ramp up the rhetoric online, and I think to some success. And obviously he's carved out a lane for himself in doing that. Curious if you think sort of actually I remember when I interviewed Roe, he was sort of saying like, the pendulum swings and it swings back. Do you think that the pendulum will swing back on that sort of content? And obviously you even mentioned the Democrats. And I mean, I kind of thought it was a bit of a funny thing, but like, the rumor about Trump, giving oral sex to Bill Clinton, right, was something that we saw for the first time, I think, in a while. Mainstream Democratic Party accounts sort of jumping on that,
Oh,
playing into it. Oh, hello.
sending a cat to
Beaming. I love it.
attack
What's the
my
name?
interview. Atom, ATOM, like
Okay,
the molecule,
bailing
not
you out.
Atom.
Bailing you out.
Bailing me out.
No,
But
I'm
I'm
just
happy
kidding.
to I'm happy to answer the
I'm kidding.
question. I think that what's really good about what's going on at the Democratic Party right now is that every single candidate across many different spectrums of the party is coming basically to life, right? In terms of the fact that, sorry, someone's spam calling me, genuinely, not scripted. In terms of the fact that each person is coming into their own voice. And I think that the principals themselves are starting to really allow their teams to engage and activate on those things. And so we're seeing different things, different strategies being tried, and it's all in service of growing the Democratic Party's brand. And I think each candidate, each team can do that in their own special way. And I think the results and the numbers are there to prove it, that there's a hunger for these different kind of actions in the Democratic Party online.
And I guess like one of the takeaways from the Mamdani campaign, I think that was sort of debated online was this idea that candidates can't go viral without sort of a more extreme or, radical or ambitious, not to load it with a negative framing, agenda of policies. Do you see it that way? Or, I guess counterexamples to me are a Jasmine Crockett, a Gavin Newsom, folks who very clearly can go viral, but I think would be thought of as more sort of the center lane of the party. How do you see that?
I see it. I see it. And that's what's so good about digital now is that because you can go viral with something that people might presume as moderate or centrist or unexciting, right? But if you're willing to be authentic in terms of how you are presenting that message to people, and if you're willing to humble yourself into reaching out to communities, understanding where Democrats went wrong, I think that is it's producing such good messaging from every spectrum of the party.
And I guess like, one theme too, and I'm curious your perspective, is I feel like I've seen a lot of critique that people feel the digital and social media people doing democratic content are not diverse, that they're sort of from the same group. And I know some people have even gone to say, it's all these like sort of like very online gay men. Um, do you see that? I don't think that's the case, actually, knowing a lot of people that work in this space. Like, I think that's a misconception, and pretty unfair actually to some of the work we've seen come out. But wonder what you see the diversity like in that space, and is it getting better? And sort of how are we telling stories that reach different communities?
Yeah. What I've been telling, and I just said to someone previously, is that the problem that the Democratic Party had is we had the same people who went to the same prep schools, same college national championship debate teams or whatever, UN, things like that, went to the same colleges, had the same professors in the same degrees in the same classes, doing the same projects over and over, doing the then same internships at different think tanks or whatever, and then going to work with the same people in these offices. And so I think what we're seeing now is a increasingly ability and willingness to have differing ideas and differing perspectives in the Democratic Party.
And I guess though, like going from that, one of the things I think a lot of people responded to is that Democrats have finally built a new media ecosystem to a certain extent. And the Washington Post just did a big piece on them. And sort of you could just see from the faces, right? There were zero minority faces among the big creators sort of leading the new media for Democrats. And I think in some ways it's recreated some of the blind spots that legacy media, of course, had. And I think it's a risk not to play, woke scold or identity politics. I think just we know that people trust communicators that they feel they can identify with. And there's a lot of data backing that up. Ro Khanna seems to go everywhere, though. So maybe that assessment on my end is incorrect, which would love to sort of understand what you guys are seeing out there, because I know you do a lot of podcasts, a lot of new media. Or if you do agree with that assessment, sort of what's the path forward? What needs to be done?
Yeah, I just think that the party in general needs to take this kind of high horse that we put ourselves on, whether it's the consultant class
Mhm.
or the political class, and even sometimes the candidates themselves, and humble ourselves a little bit, right? Because we lost up and down the ballot. We lost in 2024, whether you think it's fair or not. We dropped the ball digitally, and not no specific names, no specific candidates, that you can blame it all entirely on. I think that we did not take the effort to reach out into communities that, and it's not that they deserve to hear us, right? It is always, I say this, it is always our honor as Democrats to be allowed onto these different podcasts or different YouTube things or able to go out to these events. It is not something that we are owed. It is not something that we are entitled to.
Mhm.
People are doing us a solid by allowing us to come onto their podcast. And I think that the humility aspect of that is something that really needs to be worked on in the consultant class.
And I guess speaking of humility, and maybe this is a thought that sort of reflects the criticism you're making, so feel free to say that. Would Ro Khanna go on Nick Fuentes' podcast?
So I think that we really are part of this coalition of Democrats, I think, across the party who are increasingly seeking out differing opinions in terms of where we would have people go, and have those conversations, because we have to have a build a bigger tent. Okay. And so I can't really name specifics of who we would or wouldn't go on. I think that I would really talk about, as a whole, the Democratic Party's willingness to further accept those kind of less, fear of going on to those different things.
And I guess the criticism, I think, from folks who would balk at the idea of, a congressman going on to his podcast would be that it's somehow normalizing him or sort of laundering his extreme ideas to a more sort of mainstream audience, or sort of, even just acknowledging his platform in that way would be a concession. And I think, different people can debate on that. Do you guys have like a red line on like a conversation that you wouldn't have?
So here's what I would say, my personal philosophy with
Yeah.
this is: when I was younger and I didn't know much about politics or how the world worked, and I grew up in a very rural Texas. I grew up in Texas, right? Conservative Texas. I went into these, communities online when I was younger, where you're not hearing differing opinions, right? You're not hearing the different ways people think about things, and there's no pushback. There's no, different uniformity thing. And so I think I have personally an understanding of the willingness of the party, that we need to have this willingness to engage in these open discussions of people who, whether we vote, super disagree with them or not. I think that there's a conversation that has to be had about expanding our tent, and not allowing young men to enter this deep cesspool of really right wing content. Sometimes, because they don't understand that there's options out there. The algorithms these days are very, very targeted. They're very
Yeah.
pushing people towards controversy and things like that. And I think that, an interesting thing I've learned throughout this year is that people who you would think disagree with you on a lot of things agree on you with others, right? And that's not about platforming their ideas or normalizing their ideas or anything like that. It's about how having humility, right? And really also understanding that there has to be pushback to these ideas.
Yeah.
You have to be able to go onto these platforms with people who disagree with you. And it's not, any specific person. It goes for any kind of creator, right? And have those discussions where you push back and show that you're willing to stand up for the ideas that you believe in, and that your candidate believes in, and that the Democratic Party, which is, I think, gearing up to be in the strongest, position we've had in a long time, is willing to fight for.
I love that. And I have to say, as somebody that goes on a lot of conservative media, I'm a believer in that. I think where we've gone wrong is to have like, you know, a random person who can't defend their arguments, like be the sort of punching bag on those networks. That's very different than somebody who's well thought out, like, a congressman defending their position, speaking to an audience. Like, I think obviously that Theo Vaughn example is a great one of Ro Khanna talking about AI regulation in a way that I think really broke through. How do you see the attention economy And, and I guess I'll say my opinion. I think Ro Khanna isn't necessarily like the most outgoing, charismatic candidate in the world. And I think he has other strengths. Does What's the approach then if it's against a Gavin Newsom and an AOC and people that are really spending a majority of their time in front of a camera trying to kind of go viral and like have that be their approach? Whereas, of course, I think Khanna's got a lot of attention for getting something done. Huge, right? The release of the Epstein files, where we'll see. And I think what they have 4 days left, 3 days left. Um, but talk a little bit about that and how it informs your digital strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very personal belief for me that I think that not every candidate has to be a show horse, right? A show horse versus workhorse. I had this conversation with someone. I think that there could be policy wonks for every specific kind of policy. I mean, I'm not on the official side, so I'm learning like every day just from friends I have in this like area that there's committees for things I'd never even heard of, right? And obviously that's generalizing it, but I think that there's so many different opportunities for any kind of politician from any edge of the party, we're one big party, to go into different spaces that maybe are policy focused or maybe they're more entertainment focused. And I think that
Yeah.
that's the humility aspect that requires us to really understand that not everybody is meant to have that million view podcast, but I think it's still just as important to go on to a podcast that's extremely niche that has 500 dedicated subscribers.
Yeah. And like, I'm sure also there's a lot of candidates that say, hell no, I'm not doing a 500-person podcast. But I think it's a really smart and great approach. And especially when you can take the content and feed it to an audience of, all the sort of followers you
Yep.
guys have. So talk a little bit. I loved that video of Rogue going to the South with, I think it was some ranchers talking to them. What goes it? Nice. All right. So brainchild behind that, I'm going to guess to some
It
extent.
was a team effort. It was a team
Team
effort.
effort. All right. So talk a little bit like what's the goal there? How does it play when you actually get there? And I guess like what are the impacts of that? Tell people a little bit if they haven't seen it, just about it.
Yeah. So the video you're referencing is Ro Khanna went to Texas to speak with farmers, ranchers. He went to a rodeo and things like that to really get the full Texas experience because everything is bigger in Texas, of course, being raised there, but also the prices are big in Texas, right? We spoke to people in Bucky's, we spoke to people who can't afford rent, who have been in school getting their masters and are, not able to get the job that they really, really want because they feel like the economy is not working for them. And so the really the highlight of that video and the importance of that video was really showing that it's possible to go into these different places and speak to people who might not entirely agree. I think a lot of people had no idea who he was, right? And being able to accept that, hey, you're a public servant, and these are people who they're looking for something to believe in. They don't feel like the economy is working for them. And if you're willing to just listen and hear them out, they might be willing to listen to you too as well.
That's like such a great mentality. I love it. Talk a little bit about the divide online that I think, you said you're from Texas. So, topic of the week and last week has been Jasmine Crockett jumping into that Senate race. As with pretty much every opportunity, I see Dems both in the center, in the moderate lane, and on the left using this to rehash every disagreement on earth. What, as a digital sort of operative, is your strategy to kind of either try to straddle both of those demographics, obviously understanding that the base of the party is quite broad and I think shares, some central views, but has a wide range of disagreements as well?
Yeah, I think that is super important, especially digitally. I'm glad you mentioned digitally that we have one internet, right? But it is a web and a fractal and a spiral and whatever shape possible of different communities and different shows, podcast forums, chat rooms, things like that, threads, right? Any conceivable place, there are people and voters for the taking. And I think that it is such a net positive for everybody involved if we're getting strong democratic messaging of democratic values in ways that people feel is good and relevant to their team. Because I think it's a net positive for all of us. We're trying to build a bigger, stronger Democratic Party, and that kind of stuff is how you do it, right? Is being willing to go into different places, speak your ideas, and speak in a way that feels true to who you are authentically as a candidate.
And I guess like Jasmine Crockett, I think, is a good example of this. But I'm a big believer. We've seen a bunch of influencers run for office recently, and they haven't actually performed as well as I think some might have thought. In Texas, there was Isaiah Martin, who's, done great stuff online, but I think he got about 5% or less of the primary vote, despite raising a good amount of money nationally. Deja Fox ran in Arizona, lost by 40 points, again, despite the splashy sort of national media coverage. Here in New York, Jack Schlossberg jumped in a race. It's not going too well. He's already sort of moved on from his first campaign manager. My thinking is that Democrats don't need to sort of compromise and have people with very weak resumes that are very online viral influencers, and also have people that can speak a modern digital language. Crockett's an example to me. Shannon Watts, who's, not running for office, but has built a major national digital movement, is one name. Ro Khanna, you were telling us, does his own content. Do you see then the party relying less on influencers? I feel like the argument I see is, yes, we had all these 70 and 80-year-olds and 60-year-olds who weren't digital natives. They didn't really understand how to make a compelling narrative on the internet. But now, and obviously it's great to have, lots of high profile DNC Dem influencers kind of be able to translate for them. I feel like the next crop of candidates are digitally literate and they won't need necessarily to sort of um, shop out that communications effort. Talk a little bit about that. Maybe I'm way wrong.
No, I mean, I think it's a fascinating viewpoint, and I think it strikes down to the context and the conversations we're all having within the Democratic Party, which is how do we best reach people, rebuild from the struggles we've had, and come back even stronger, right? And I think what's so interesting about that is that the party is so massive and so wide, and there's so many talents and so many areas where we can build off each other that it's super important that we're able to have these open discourse and open dialogues, and also propel people who are willing to fight for a stronger Democratic Party. And anybody who's willing to fight for a stronger Democratic Party is someone who I like.
Fair. But I think in a world of limited resources, would investing in influencers in the next several years, is that still something worth doing, or are there better, more valuable things to do in the long run? And I guess thinking of specifically, right, DNC famously brought 200 creators to cover the DNC, and it got a lot of buzz and attention and obviously generated some views, but a lot of views. But I guess there's this underlying concern that Democratic influencers speaking to Democratic followers about Democratic talking points and kind of repackaging that stuff. I don't know that I've seen the proof that that's worked at all. What I think does work is going on Joe Rogan, going on sort of a platform that's talking about a bajillion different topics, as crazy as they might be, and having that political one-off conversation, or get winning that person over on, one area, to your point, that there is mutual agreement, and actually persuading people instead of sort of what I call more like the cheerleader style influencer, or maybe there's value in both. But what's your experience been?
My experience is that I think that there's so many different wide varying communities
Mhm.
that you'll never be able to have someone who fits into exactly every checkbox, and maybe even not even a majority of the check boxes, right? But the fact that people are willing to try and stand up and fight for the Democratic Party at a time when I think some people have abandoned the Democratic Party,
Mhm.
it's really nice to see, right? And so I think that if you're willing to support the Democratic Party, I think that there has to be a conversation of how can we help? How can we help you help us? And how can we, further help get our messaging out there? Because there's so many persuadable, convincible people, and also people who might not have seen exactly what it is we're up to. And that's through nobody's fault of their own. It's really about having that humility and understanding that nobody is the smartest person in the room, nobody is the smartest person in the party. It's about how we have these coalitions of ideas and come together, and I think that that builds just a stronger Democratic Party.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. Anything you want to leave us with? Like one thing, like what's your favorite thing you've put out? Like best piece of content?
I will say, yeah, the Row TikTok video, the one that has almost 20 million views, right? It was filmed. I don't even know where it was filmed. I don't think the lighting is the best. I don't think there wasn't a script or anything, but it was Rose speaking to the real issues that mattered to people on TikTok at that time. And that's why it popped off, blew up, and got petition signers, right? Because you don't have to be the most produced, you don't have to be the most succinct, you don't have to be the most funny, charismatic individual or whatever. I think that there's a big Democratic Party, and that includes the ability to have communicators who fit those different, lanes of that party as well. And so I think that it's really great that we're having this conversation, and I think it's good that it's coming from the digital side as well, because it really goes to show that we are back and better than ever, seriously. And I think that I only have high hopes, some might say, for ways that the digital aspect of this can all get better as we go into the future.
Okay, I love that. Future White House Digital Director, Caleb
Oh,
Brock.
thanks, y'all.
Thank you for joining.
Of course. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. Bye.